We are in Exodus chapter 13. Begins with, then Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. And it seems like there's an insert with something else that's going to come after this now, and then he's going to retake up this story. So essentially, we have just come out, the mixed multitude, now called the nation Israel, has come out from Egypt, and the Lord has passed over the firstborn of those who were in the house according to his prescription, with the blood of the lamb on the doorposts and the header, the lintel, and those firstborn were allowed to live. All other firstborn were dedicated unto the Lord and dead. He took them.
Also a question. Is this just, it's talking about just the firstborn, but sanctify me, every firstborn, that first offspring, both man and beast, belongs to me. What about the secondborn and the thirdborn coming up? I mean, shouldn't they all belong to God?
Oh yes, but this is a particularly special dedication. What do you think the significance is of the special dedication of the firstborn? Yes, ma'am.
I don't have the answer to that.
Oh, you have another question. So let's answer this question, then we'll get to your question, Megan. Yeah, Alex.
Well, the firstborn is supposed to take on the mantle of leadership of the family once the father or the patriarch passes on. And so they're the leader. So if they are dedicated to the Lord, then your leadership is fine. People are going to continue to follow the way they are.
Yes, but initially this dedication is a dedication unto death. So they're not going to be leading anything. They're going to die. So what is the meaning? Yeah, it's Jesus. He's the firstborn over all creation. The purpose of this dedication of firstborn is to start bringing forth concepts and pieces of Jesus.
So is this a symbolic, for Israel or Jewish, is it a symbolic death that they're sanctifying them to?
He's going to get to that as we read down further. Once we get down to verses 11 and on, we'll get to there. It could be symbolic, and if they are rebellious, it won't be symbolic. Just like in the Passover. If they were faithful and followed his prescription, then the firstborn was allowed to live. What if they were not faithful and didn't follow his prescription? Then he died. God says, the firstborn is mine, and I have determined this. Just like Jesus, his only begotten Son, firstborn over all creation, and not only because he lives, he takes on the role that you described, Alex, because of his resurrection from the dead, and he does live, but with all other firstborn being terrestrial in nature, they're dedicated unto God, and God has chosen the firstborn as the one who takes on the responsibility of sin here, you see.
Right.
And therefore dedicated to death.
Leading up to all this, like it's always been even down to the ninth son that was chosen by God, or the second. It wasn't just the first. Is this a new ordinance that he's setting up here?
Oh yeah, this is new to them. This is not something they would have had any idea about before. They would not have known this ordinance before. This is a new ordinance, and he's bringing it particularly to their attention to tie it to what he has just done in Egypt, passing over the firstborn sons in the homes that were covered with the blood of the Lamb. And you're going to get more connection as we read forward, because he's going to continue to add pieces, kind of like, if you will, at this point, what he's done is he's dumped the puzzle on the table, and now he's going to start putting the pieces together so that the picture will take shape. That's what he's doing. And in order to get the fullness of the picture, you got to be patient to go through and put all the pieces together in the puzzle. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so usually there's a distinction that says the firstborn son. Because it doesn't say the firstborn son, is that to assume just the firstborn no matter what it is? Or is that answered later?
The answer is it's answered later. Clarification will come.
Okay.
So he begins by saying certain things and then clarification comes. And so, yes, he will clarify that. Good question, though. And Moses said to the people, remember this day, verse 3, and Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord, Yehovah, brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. On this day you are going out, in the month of Abib. It shall be when the Lord, Yehovah, brings you into the land of the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Amorites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord, to Yehovah. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord, Yehovah, did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. Yehovah has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Why not eat unleavened bread? What's the point of this particular leaven? Yeah, so in this case, because it's the old leaven, it represents the old life of sin not dedicated to God. That's why they're to purge out the leaven, to symbolize the old leaven being removed. There is a new leaven we're supposed to have, but the old leaven is supposed to be removed. And so there's a period of no leaven to make it clear that there's supposed to be an elimination of sin. And in 7 days, the reason for 7 days is 7 in a number of places gives us the total or completeness of something. There are 7 days in a week, for example. That's a complete week. And so God uses the number 7 to symbolize things at times, and so he has us do actual practice in real time to symbolize something that is not supposed to be restricted just for that real time. So it would be wrong to associate, because I'm supposed to purge the leaven out of my life for 7 days, that I'm only not supposed to sin for those 7 days. But that was an ordinance given to them to get them to remember. Why would he need to remind them? How many of us think that if we had been alive at this time and witnessed the miraculous signs and wonders and had been led out of Egypt and God had rescued us, we'd need to be remembered?
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, the answer is every one of us would need to be. Because you know what? Real life happens. You get busy, you get caught up in work, you get caught up in urgent things, you get caught up in raising kids and interacting with spouses and friends and people of the world, and life goes on for a period of time. You're going to need to be reminded. And so he has set up ways to remind us. Why are we here on what we call Sunday morning, the first day of the week?
A number of reasons. First one's to honor God. Second one is to fellowship, to be together as one and to honor God, and then to learn.
But it should also be a reminder. It's a reminder of, it's the first day of the week that the discovery of the resurrection of Jesus took place, but it's also a reminder of us to, during the week, we may have gotten off track somewhere. We may have not been purposeful about our thoughts to make sure that they were for the glory of God. We may have been apathetic because life got so busy, or we allowed it to, or maybe we even planned it to. But what we didn't do is think about, how am I sounding? How am I acting? How am I looking? Because where does he say this ordinance is to be kept? Huh? Well, he gives us two particular places in this passage. Where does he say they should be located?
Among among the people in, oh, sorry.
You were saying, Megan?
On your hands and between your...
Right, on your hands and between your eyes. And then there's a so that. In other words, there should be a byproduct of that. So let's start there. Why on the hands and between the eyes? First of all, why on the hands?
It's what you do.
It's what you do. Everything you do should be free of the leaven of the old life. Why between the eyes? Some people would say because of what you see. How many can see this spot right here between your eyes?
Nobody.
Nobody. So why between the eyes?
For others to see.
Is that your mind?
It's your mind. He's trying to give us the best way we can identify with where we think. So our thoughts are to be affected and our actions are to be affected. So that, what does he say? So that what?
So that the Lord's law may be in your mouth.
So what's going to come out of our mouth now?
Between your hands and your mind is your mouth.
You figure, he's covered everything about our existence. What we do, what we think, what we say, how anybody else is going to interact with us. He says it is supposed to be representative of having purged off the leaven of the old life. We now are going to have something new. They don't even know what that something new is yet. And so when they are conscious, they should be doing all for the glory of God, valuing the presence of God, which he's going to talk about here coming up to them. And the fact that he is the one he didn't say he sent them out of Egypt. What does he say? He's the one who did what with them out of Egypt? Brought them out. What's the difference between sending someone out and bringing someone out?
Well, you're responsible.
Doing it yourself.
Yeah.
There's a hotel chain that understands the difference between this and the way they serve their customers. They charge a lot of money to stay at their hotel. Somebody comes up to one of the workers there and says, "Where is the restroom?" Most hotels say, down the hall in whichever direction, right? This person in this hotel is required to take them to the restroom. See, in one sense, when it's down the hall and to the direction, they're sent to the restroom. The person does not go with them. In the other hotel, they bring them to the restroom. They go with them. A simple word delineates the difference between the presence of God and the absence of God with them, whether it's sent or brought.
And if you're brought, you get to where you're going. If you're sent, who knows where you're going to wind up.
You may or may not arrive there, correct. But by being brought, the person who has the responsibility is actually engaging with you all the way there. So God is telling them he's with them by he's bringing them out, not sending them out. Little words like this have great meaning and difference between what's going on. And he says, and I brought you out of this place. So here's how I want you to be now. First, I want you to have the old leaven put off. That old life left behind where we came from. And I want it to be in your thoughts, in your deeds, and in your words. To some of the people you come in contact with.
Oh.
Yeah, right. Every single one. Where do we most commonly forget to do this?
At home.
At home. We get up and run autopilot when we wake up most of the time. This is why he starts off with, and when your son asks you, he is going to emphasize over and over again here coming up the importance of teaching the generation that's in their home first. That our actions would be such that, our speech would be such that, and those would be byproducts of our thoughts that are such that, guided and directed by what? He says here, the law of Yehovah, the law of the Lord. That's what he wants us to be guided and directed by. It's supposed to be in such a manner that it would be what's called conspicuous. What's conspicuous mean?
Out there for everybody to see and notice.
not only out there for everybody to see and notice, but there's one other element.
Particularly drawing attention to it, though.
For some reason, it would draw attention. Conspicuous is not just being out there, because physically existing and going out the door, you're out there. But conspicuous would be something that draws attention. Those of you that were with me last night don't answer this question, but what is supposed to be most conspicuous about those that are children of God, those that are disciples of Jesus particularly, that would be conspicuous, that the world would know that we're His?
You were past the jump earlier.
Our actions.
It is our actions ultimately, but what kind of actions? Actions and speech, by the way, but what does Jesus say that will make us conspicuous to the world so that the world will know we're His disciples? The way that we love one another. It's the way that we love one another. Lots of people claim to love other people, but the way that we love one another will make us conspicuous. Jesus says that way that we love one another should be as He has loved us. That should make us conspicuous. That should make us stick out. That should make people say, why do you do that? Why is it that way? And then we give an answer. What is the answer? Well, then tell your son, this is done because of what Yehovah did for me. When He rescued me. And we don't say when we came out of Egypt, because that's not what happened to us, but figuratively that's the same thing, right? He has rescued me. And so let me tell you about Him. And there's supposed to be a sign. They're also supposed to be a sign to us, not just to the other people. Verse 11, and it shall... Yes, sir, go ahead. You had something else?
Right there in verse 9.
Mm-hmm.
To them, what would the Lord's law have meant? We have a different picture because of what then the Lord delivers to Moses and all the things He gets later on, but they didn't have that at this point. So what would the Lord's law in your mouth have meant to them?
They didn't have... You notice here it doesn't say Moses' law.
No.
There's a lot of times when people refer to Moses and they're defining what they're trying to define as the law of God. Well, the law of God existed before Moses existed. Did God not give a law to Adam? And would not these people have known the story of Adam? Probably also the story of Noah and his family. And who knows how many other people that go before him. Certainly Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, there is detail that comes forth in the law that's delivered through Moses. But the subject of loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength is not ever going to be new to anyone since Adam.
Well, what about just the law of the 10 plagues? I mean, I'm going to do this if you don't do that. I mean, they ought to have known by now that if they obey God, He'll save them and spare them and bring them out of whatever. If they don't, then they die and bury with everybody else. So,
Right.
I mean, just in that alone,
Sure.
God showed them the law.
That's right. That's right. Well, same with Noah. He brought forth the flood for all those who would not get on the ark. So, by faith, you get in the ark. And without faith, it's impossible to be saved. It's impossible to please the Lord.
Even if they painting the blood on the lintel and the doorpost.
Right. You had to have the faith to slaughter the lamb and go paint the doorposts and the header. And keep your family inside. That's right. So there are elements of which God has demonstrated that what He is looking for are people, as we sang in the song, there should be nothing that gives us more pleasure than Him. It's the having pleasure in something else that is not from God. The something else itself may actually be from God, but we have corrupted the level of pleasure we look to receive from it. And that does not come from God. Here's a good example. For men particularly, what is clearly a gift from God and is probably one of the greatest warnings from God as to not draw more pleasure from this than Him? Women. That's right. Well, women in general. And then He defines now how to get the proper godly pleasure from the woman that He has given to us. But women are clearly a gift, a creation of God, but we're also not to draw more pleasure from her or them than we do Him. And the way that's delineated is how we go about engaging with her. You know, when I wake up in the morning, my thoughts in succession, if not all simultaneously, should be, I've been brought forth in life to the Lord, so I dedicate myself to the Lord, and I am looking to Him now to help me to be a godly man, a godly husband, and a godly father, so that I will rightly love, cherish, and nourish my wife, washing her with the water of the Word and being a blessing to her. That I would love and train my daughter, and that my speech and my actions would be edifying to her and a blessing to her. Does not always mean that they're going to think they are loving, because sometimes that includes correction that people don't like, especially when they're younger. The less mature they are, the less they will understand correction, the less they will appreciate it. So, what law is there? The Lord's law may be in your mouth. Love the Lord ahead of all this stuff that you're supposed to be putting behind. That's the essence.
Well, verse 10 it talks about this ordinance or regulation. Wouldn't that just be the law itself? Remember this law? I'm setting apart. You're supposed to remember this from here on out every year. Remember this now.
The ordinance he's setting forth now is the 7 days of leaven-free.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Wouldn't that be the memorial of the Lord's law? But I'm just now establishing this day, once a year, remember this. Wouldn't that be the establishment of this new law?
It very well could be. What they would understand is the totality of it, but God never stops there as that being what the purpose behind it was, just to tell a story and say we do this as a memorial for what the Lord has done, because the story was supposed to go on to, well, what did He do? And why is that significant? God knows He's provoking that interaction to take place. But yes, this ordinance is the practice of purging out the leaven and being without leaven for 7 days. Verse 11, and it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land, when Yehovah brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as He swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart, or if you look in your parenthetical notes there, you'll see it says to cause to pass over. To the Lord, prepositional phrase. In other words, pass from you to Him. To Yehovah, all that open the womb. That is, now here's the delineation, the distinction. Every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord's. The males shall be Yehovah's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So it shall be when your son asks you in the time to come, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, by strength of hand, the Lord, Yehovah, brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord, Yehovah, killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord, to Yehovah, all males that open the womb. But all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord Yehovah brought us out of Egypt. So, now we have some clarification, don't we? So he's narrowed it down to the males that open the womb. Now, how was it that they were to redeem a donkey? Right. Why redeem the donkey?
Was it just the colt that Jesus walked on, maybe?
Certainly that would be one connection. Why else?
And why couldn't they redeem the donkey by itself? I mean, is it just...
Well, because you can't redeem something by itself. To redeem means to do something else in place of. So to redeem means, if Alex is my firstborn son, to redeem him, he can't die. Somebody or something else has to.
So if the lamb...
Otherwise, he's not redeemed. He's dead.
If the lambs are chosen by God, then the donkey has to be like I don't know, they were stubborn wild beasts of the field. I don't know, they're just out there. And why he picked the donkey had to be redeemed by the lamb. Maybe it's a symbolic gesture that those that aren't mine can be redeemed, but they have to be redeemed through the blood of the lamb.
Let me answer this question this way, and that is, nowhere in the scriptures does God say, this is why I spoke about the donkey being redeemed by the lamb. He doesn't do it. Okay? So we can't come out and say, finitely, this is why. But we certainly see connections between Jesus riding in to town. We also we know about donkeys, if we know about how donkeys were used versus horses, for example, at this time. Horses were animals of war and donkeys were animals of peace. The other thing is we would see donkeys as bearers of burden. And they'd be pack animals. So all of those might have something to do with it, but we don't ever get God coming out and saying, this is why I specifically said to redeem the donkey, you'd have to use a lamb. Now, we certainly know why the lamb is chosen. So he tells us to redeem a donkey, what has to happen? Have to kill a lamb.
Why is it if you don't kill a lamb, you got to break the donkey's neck?
Because why? Remember what I said. If he's my firstborn son, if he is redeemed, that which is used to redeem him is what's going to die. If he is not redeemed, guess what happens?
He has to die.
He dies.
The donkey has to die. If he doesn't.
You see, that's why you have to break the donkey's neck if you're not going to redeem it. You're basically deciding which one you would rather have die, the lamb or the donkey. And the connection of bearing the burdens is this is an animal of bearing burden. We are people who bear our own burden. Do we want to be released by the blood of the lamb or not?
So it's like an innocent has to redeem.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Now, if you notice, then he goes on to say, in verse 13, and the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. How?
The only way you can redeem was to kill a lamb.
That was the only thing that was given. So they would know then, since that was the only redemptive plan God brought forward, the only conclusion would be they'd have to kill the lamb. How do we know that they would know that? Well, because when they were explaining to their sons what they're doing and what this means, he says, therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb of the firstborn, and of my sons I redeem. How do you redeem him, Dad? Well, this lamb has to die. Why? Why does the lamb have to die? At this point, what would their answer be? Because God said so. Because Yehovah said that's what the only way, and if you're the firstborn son, because he says that's the only way you get to live.
What?
Do you think that's a good idea, son? What do you think, the lamb or you?
So what about the secondborn and thirdborn sons and daughters?
Don't have to have the redemption on them. The lambs don't die for them.
So they get a free pass?
No, because the firstborn son represents
All of them?
it represents Jesus as the firstborn over all creation who had to die.
Right, I understand all that, but I'm just,
Okay.
It's like almost like the second and third can say, well, that's all taken care of, I don't have to do anything about it. Sure, there's a connection between firstborn, who is leader of the family, who takes responsibility for the whole train that's behind him. It just seems like that, we as individuals now have to be redeemed by the Lamb individually. He died for us. You can't just say, well, my firstborn took care of it and I'm okay, which I'm sure the people would say that. Probably in Eastern culture, we paid for number one, and so all the rest get a slide in there.
Yeah,
I That's
Go ahead.
part of it, is there's kind of a twofold analogy going on there. And in that second part, Jesus counts as that firstborn son.
Correct.
When a sacrifice was made. We all count as sons who come later. Another sacrifice doesn't have to keep being made for each of us. Just like
And we can benefit from his sacrifice
Right, and I understand that with the Christ part. I was-
because the vicarious atonement, well, it's the same thing. It's vicariously associating with him. That's why he had to come as the description gives. He couldn't come as a bird or something else. That's why the blood of goats and rams and lambs and birds could never cleanse us from sin. He had to be one of us. That's why he had to come as a man. That's another reason why it's so important to understand that for a time he made himself a little lower than the angels and made himself fully human.
And there'd be too many leaders if every second, third, fourth, there'd just be too many people leading.
Yeah.
It's not enough Indians.
So remember, the story is intended to teach us mostly about Jesus and our relationship with him and how our lives will glorify him. There are secondary and tertiary impact of these stories, but they are not the primary reason these stories are there. There are other beneficiaries of what God is doing that are not the primary reason for what's going on here. Believe it or not, Egypt was a beneficiary of the 10 plagues. How is that so?
Cleansed out all the evil.
One way is it cleansed out a lot of evil. How else would it be? Would they be beneficiaries of the 10 plagues?
Well, see, a direct benefit was all the mixed multitudes ended up knowing who the Lord was and getting to leave with Israelites.
There's another way.
In their lives for that, man.
At the end of the day, what does he say why he brought each of the plagues forward?
To show his glory.
That you will know that I, Yehovah, am God.
Right.
You become the beneficiary. You're rebelliously obstinate against me, and now I'm going to prove to you that I am. That's your benefit. If you don't die when he does that, you have a chance for recovery. You have a chance for redemption. That's why you're a beneficiary. It may be hard, may be difficult, may be unpleasant, but you still are benefiting from God manifesting himself this way. And so, the father was to teach his children, in this case his firstborn son, that he needed to be redeemed because God had passed over the firstborn sons in Egypt, and God requires that I dedicate you to him, and the way I get you back is by having the lamb die. That's the way I get you back. And so therefore I sacrifice to Yehovah all males that open the womb. But you, son, firstborn of my loins, I have redeemed. Remember, this is a passing over. And I went over last week, this is how we can understand the passage in Romans where God talks about how he previously passed over the sins. Because they were not cleansed of their sin in this case, it was passed over. All right, so now we pick up the journey. Verse 17, then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. The children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So they took their journey from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord, Yehovah, went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or pillar of fire by night from before the Lord. From the people, sorry. So, interesting here. We have, after completing this chapter, we have a number of contrasts. What are the contrasts you can think of here?
Well,
that are going on in this chapter? How is God trying to say, this is one side and that's the other side?
First verse has the way of the Philistines versus the way God wanted them to go, which was going to be more difficult. Clearly, as he talks about later on, that narrow is the gate and difficult is the way, and few there are who will find it.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll look at that. The path God wanted them to go was through the mountains in the wilderness, but there was an easy way over here. All the people were.
Well, it was there. It was closer, probably within sight of the border. But in order to take...
Also would have been a shorter trip to the land he was taking him to.
Right, but once in the land, they had to fight for the land.
It also would have had a pathway of travel because that's the trade routes where it would have been an easier route of travel. It didn't have all the hills and mountains. Where did he take him? Through the wilderness, up and over the mountains, to difficult places. So yes, the contrast was of the two ways. What other contrast do we see in this chapter? And by the way, God chose the more difficult way, and if they wanted to be with him, that's the way they had to go.
The fire and the
Cloud and
cloud.
fire.
Cloud and the fire. So those are being compared instead of contrasted, because they both represent the presence of the Lord. So comparison is representing the same thing. Contrasting means they're representing two different things. What else is being contrasted?
Well, there was the marital, they went up like a big wedding party, but they also brought up the bones of
Joseph.
Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
So they have not only a wedding party, but they also have a death march, or whatever, a funeral is the same procession, I mean, because of...
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it that way. That could be very interesting. It's very possible. Newness of life and death going along together. How about regarding the firstborn son? What's the contrast?
He redeemed.
He does redeem him if the man so chooses and the Lord wants them redeemed. But what's the contrast?
Firstborn animal versus the firstborn male.
Not so much.
Well, he killed all the firstborn in Egypt, and he's redeeming all the firstborn that went with
So
him.
there's one contrast, is the firstborn in Egypt were killed. They were not covered by the lamb. The firstborn, as they go out, he's telling them he wants them to live, and he makes provision for them to live. What about go ahead.
Because they're born, something else has to die.
Okay, so because they're born, something else has to die. Let's look into the minds of the people who are being taken out of Egypt. What do you think they thought about their firstborn son or the firstborn male of their flock or herd?
Well, from history, they were the chosen, I mean, they were like, they got everything, all the inheritance, they were that, yeah.
Right, so they were considered to be the favored one of the patriarch, and he'd treat him specially, and this firstborn was his, right? What has God now said is the contrast?
He had to give them to me.
They're not yours, they're mine.
And
That would be a big contrast.
just in reference to what Megan said about something has to die.
Right,
In
order to live.
Yeah, in our lives today, when we're born again, something has to die.
That's right. Same thing he's telling these people. What has to die?
Flesh.
The leaven of the old life has to die, has to be put off in order for life to come forward. So there's life in death, not and death, in death. But it has to be death of the right thing. There's lots of contrasts that are going on here. One might say the contrast between the lamb and the donkey. The innocent, I think that was Megan that brought that up, having to take on the penalty for the guilty, the one with the burden. There's lots of contrasts here. God is handling himself in such a way as to be conspicuously shocking to them. Very much noticed, very much, oh my gosh, this is all new. Yep, it would all be new. Because they had to be rescued out of Egypt, the place he didn't want to leave them, in the customs that they were practicing, he didn't want them to continue to practice. What is the one thing, though, they seem to have remembered all these years? Joseph. Isn't that interesting? They not only remembered him, going, oh yeah, Joseph said this, but you realize what it would have taken in order for them to have the ability to do what they've done. Somebody would have had to, when he died, make a way for them to be able to carry the bones out, so they put them in a some kind of a stone coffin or burial device that they could pick up and take out, that's not going to decay after 400 years.
Well, and then the prophecy that Joseph told them, and that God will surely take care of you, and you will carry my... And if they didn't have need of that, they would have known that God was going to deliver them. But I kind of read that right now. He told them that you're going to be taken care of by God, and He's going to deliver you. And when you go, take my bones. So there was a prophecy and hope in the fact that He spoke that God is going to deliver you out of here, and you're going to take me with you. So
that's right.
It's kind of, I never read it before. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because he didn't want to be left in Egypt. So, off they're going. They're following this pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, designating the real presence of the Lord among them. And we continue on then in the story. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he will pursue them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am Yehovah, I am the Lord. And they did so. God tells Moses to put them into a place and into a situation that would seemingly be more difficult for them and fewer options and more likely in a natural sense or in a terrestrial sense to cause them problem. And it will be that condition that will harden Pharaoh's heart and make him think that he can now take them back and pursue them.
Well, I've heard, and I'm not sure, that where he sent them was the sea on one side, mountains on the other, only one way in. And I don't know if that's just what I've heard. So they are basically bottled in there. There's no way they can get out with Pharaoh coming at them. The only deliverance is God at that point.
Yeah, essentially that's exactly right. But he's telling Moses, take my people there, and it's going to seem like an odd instruction because it's not obvious how you're going to get out of there. Matter of fact, it's so obvious that you probably aren't going to get out of there that Pharaoh's going to think he can come take you back. And he's going to then pursue you. If we drew up our own battle plans, if we just sat around a table and said, okay, which way should we go? That would have not been the way we would have chosen. That was the way God chose, however. Again, a contrast in God's ways versus our ways. This is where faith comes in. Moses had to have faith in the Lord that this was a good thing to do. But guess what else was going to happen? You're Moses now. And you've got two options before you. One of them looks like there is no way this is going to work. And the other option looks like, gee, this is a no-brainer. That's what we should do. And you're going to lead a horde of people with you. If you choose the way that looks like it's going to fail, what do you think the people are going to do with you? Especially when it's going to be the kind of failure that's going to be a failure of great cost to them. You know, if you've wasted 10 minutes of their time, that was stupid, and they move on, right? You take them someplace where they think it's going to cost them potentially their lives. How upset do you think they might get with you? You see, this is what Moses was being told to do. Talk about having to trust the Lord to do something that would be unconventional and a significant contrast from what you would think would be a logical plan. Moses is being tested here for sure.
The pillar and the cloud went there.
You're Moses, guess what you're looking for? Okay, Lord, I'm following your cloud or your fire. Right? You go with us and we'll go. And that's the essence of faith. You see, this is the same thing for us, is where we go, if we know what we're doing is the will of the Lord, do we also not know that He's there with us? Even if it's the valley of the shadow of death, as these guys would be describing this place for sure.
Well, you can't go wrong if you've got that concept in you. If God's telling you to do it, it can't be wrong.
Correct. Now convince yourself of that when it's hard. You're absolutely correct. Now convince yourself of that when it's hard. That's the essence of faith and trust. When it's hard, will I follow Him? Even though it's going to expose me to dangers, I'm going to risk being persecuted. Am I going to continue to trust the Lord? Am I going to follow Him? Am I going to be faithful to Him? Verse 5, now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? What's the contrast there?
Going out to serve their God.
Serve Yehovah or serve the Egyptians? Do we not have the same contrast in our lives today? Choose ourselves this day whom we will serve. The world says, we want you to serve us. The devil says, I want you to serve me. Are we willing to go forward and serve Yehovah at any cost? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord, Yehovah, hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. The children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-Hahiroth from before Baal-Zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, Yehovah. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than we should die in the wilderness. Sometimes when we go help people, their lives don't immediately get better. Sometimes it gets harder. I can tell you in the years I've done discipling of people, particularly family ministry, that's unfortunately the most common case. Because when you have a divided home and one person decides to start being light in that home, the darkness will attack the light. Very commonly. It's almost never apathetic. It's almost never where the darkness doesn't care. And so it becomes difficult. I know when men have come to me and asked me to disciple them and they're interested in saving their marriage and etc., I look right at them and say, there is no guarantee your marriage is going to be saved. The only thing that's guaranteed is your life will be saved. But I guarantee you this, if you don't become light, you can only send your wife back further into the darkness. You can't send her toward the light. The only chance she has of being saved, and the only real chance you have of having a marriage the way God designed it and intended it, is for you to become light and try to bring her the same direction. Same vice versa with women. It's no different. And it can become very hard for them. It'll happen with friends and acquaintances. It'll happen with all sorts of things. When we become light, those people who are in darkness are going to be impacted by the light that we have. They'll be impacted positively or negatively. There'll be a positive charge or a negative charge. They'll be attracted or they'll be repelled. But if we have relationships with people of the old leaven and we are continuing to interact with them and there is no change, it's because we're not bringing the light. That's a fact of God.
Is that, you can bring the light, but they can refuse.
Sure, that's the rejection. That's the negative charge.
Right, it wouldn't be because we weren't bringing the light.
No, I'm saying if there's no change, in other words, they don't notice anything, there's no difference in your relationship, there's absolutely no change. Your conversation with them doesn't change, their interactions with you don't change, they don't see anything different. Remember what we talked about earlier is the way that the world will know that we are disciples of Jesus is by how we love others. Not just that we love others, because that can be anything. It's by how we love others.
Right, it was the no change part. You didn't make it clear the change was where.
Change happens in us. Then it's going to impact them with us some way.
Right, and I was just thinking
it will impact us some way. I'll give you an example of something Alex was watching the other night. Alex and Sadie were watching the other night. Dina's sister came over after dropping her daughter off at U of O, and she wanted to stop by for a visit. We hadn't seen her in a while, quite a while. And she's separated from her husband now. She's alone. She's kind of doing her own thing. She's into another spiritual search, if you will, of things that she's doing. And so after a time of having dinner and just meaningless chit-chat, I drew the subject to talking to her about Jesus, purposely. Finding out what is she going to do to go forward, what's the basis of her to know truth. She's caught up in something, and I asked her what the basis of how she would decide what she's now caught up in was even true. How would she know? Ultimately, what I took her to was, why do you not want to give Jesus a chance? Why don't you want to listen to him? What is so offensive to you about Jesus that you won't listen to him? And this conversation went on for, a good hour or so. Her answers ultimately were, she had no answer to any of the questions, but she would think about it. She drove all the way to San Diego and sent us an email, basically saying, one of the things I've learned is to have new boundaries in my life, and one of the boundaries are you're never to talk to me like that ever again. So guess how much conversation we're going to have. Because when I talk with people, what's laced in my conversation, remember what he said back earlier here is, so that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. When I talk with people, what is supposed to be coming out of my mouth? If I don't do that, how am I bringing light? If I don't bring light, then the darkness has no reason to flee. There's no light. Or to be attracted. Because where would the light be? That's why the Lord tells us very clearly that when you bring light, there will be a reaction. It will be in favor or disfavor, but there will be a reaction. The only way to stop the reaction is don't bring the light. It's the only way to stop it. And then we would be failing to trust the Lord. We would be failing to walk by faith. Because we're more concerned about the impact on these other people than we are the gratefulness of what the Lord has done. Because He rescued me out of Egypt, for crying out loud, what more could I do? How could I not do these things? And so these people, they cry out to Yehovah. Now some people would say, gee, that's what they're supposed to do. What if their cry was very similar to what they just said to Moses? Would that be a good cry to cry out to the Lord? No. They're basically accusing him of evil. That'll happen. Clearly, God did not do evil to them, and neither did Moses. But that's how it was perceived by these people, because now they have this contrast. Our current position and our former position.
Yeah, but they're still looking at it in a worldly sense, because it would be better to die for the Lord and be with the Lord than it would be to serve your worldly self and to perish.
Right. But see, we end up in those same kinds of situations and have that same contrast and have to make those same decisions. Because I say I'm in the Lord, does that make me in the Lord? No, he says by the fruit of what my actions are of faith, my walk of faith, living out my life faithfully to the Lord, that's going to produce interaction with people that's going to have the two various responses. And so we end up in situations where we don't take advantage of being conscientious about the reason I'm still breathing and the reason I'm in this place and doing these things is for the glory of the Lord. You two guys were out at a fire. And for a part of the time while you were out there, you took advantage of the situation and brought forth the light even in all the smoke. Right? But we go through life a lot of times, and that's what we're supposed to do. But we go through life a lot of times and we don't do that. We not only don't do it when we're out amongst other people, because heck, we're at a barbecue and we don't want to upset the barbecue. We oftentimes don't do it in our own homes because we're so busy. Do we take the time to stop and let our kids know Jesus loves them, Jesus saved them, Jesus wants to teach them, Jesus wants to be with them. And I want to bring forth the light of Jesus in your life. I want to love you the way Jesus wants me to love you. I want to tend to you the way Jesus wants me to tend to you. To our wives and to our husbands. And some of them are going to be, yes, I'd like that. And some are going to be, no, I don't want that. That doesn't determine whether we're supposed to do it or not, though. God told Moses to go do this. Do you think he didn't know that people were going to be upset when they got trapped and Pharaoh was going to come after them? Of course he knew it.
Then we complain to God about it.
Yeah, of course. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of Yehovah, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord Yehovah will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. But lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry land through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. I am Yehovah, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel. So how did the angel of God manifest himself in this case? Pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud, right. That was the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. Good luck having a scientist explain this one to you. They're not going to be able to. This is a divine power. It's the only way the same cloud can bring darkness on one side and light on the other in such close proximity. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord, Yehovah, caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. By the way, there's the contrast again, too. Light on the side of Israel, darkness on the side of Egypt.
Caused by the same thing.
Caused by the same thing, that's correct. Verse 21, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord Yehovah caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right and on their left. How many of you think it takes faith to jump down into the Red Sea where there's a wall of water on each side and you're going to walk through the middle?
No, it would be just so amazing to see it. You'd kind of be like, sure, why not? Who's ever seen this? I mean, it's not accidental.
Yeah.
A shark swimming up there looking at you. Aquarium.
Carrie would have been trying to figure out how to get his fishing pole. Trying to reach into it and grab it.
Well, that's the other thing, is the water now, I mean, would you want to go put your, see if you could put your hand into the water, is it, you know what I'm saying? Is it?
I imagine there were lots of things that went through people's minds. I'll bet we could sit here and think about what are all the things that could have gone through their minds, and we could come up with an inexhaustible list. Yes, walk or run, right.
I'm thinking all those things, but I'm getting the heck on the other side before,
Would have been amazing, no question.
In dry land, I mean, the scientists try to say, it pushed it back with the wind, and they would have crossed on the bottom, but it was dry land. There was no water.
Right.
Sand and dust kicking up, and it's like, that's a miracle even there. I mean,
Yeah. Good luck taking natural occurrences and describe this one. That's as people try to do. The miracles of God, some people try to explain by, okay.
Tide or this or that.
Right. Why did the locust come? Well, this happened. Or why did the quail come? Because that happened. And they try to use what they call natural circumstances or events to try to explain what God did. There's no way to do that here. You either believe this happened or you don't. And ultimately, if we believe this did not happen, then we don't believe God. So believing in Him is a waste of time. God did this. He dried up the ground in a pathway for 600,000 men plus their families and the mixed multitude to pass through ahead of the Egyptians, and held them back by a cloud that gave them such darkness they didn't even see Him heading off and going through.
Read over the mixed multitude. With who were they? And did they paint their mantles and their doorposts to keep from being wiped out?
We don't know the answer to that. You may have a part of that mixed multitude that is there because they did paint their doorposts and their kid didn't die. And there may be some of them there that didn't paint and their kid died, and they said, that's the last time I'm standing against this God.
Right.
We don't get that answer. But I'll bet there's both.
Right. They got to go, though.
They got to go because now, still being preserved alive, they have the choice. Go with Him or don't go with Him. Come out of Egypt or stay. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord, Yehovah, looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and He troubled the army of the Egyptians. And He took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us free from the face of Israel, for the Lord Yehovah fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord Yehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. So Jehovah overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So the Lord, Jehovah, saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord Jehovah had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord, feared Jehovah, and believed the Lord. They believed Jehovah and his servant Moses.
It doesn't tell us in here what happened to the pillar of fire and smoke that was behind him, because it obviously was removed so the Egyptians could now chase him into the water. So did he then go before them through the water, probably?
No, he probably just came around them and met them on the other side as they were going through. He held them back, but he could also become the fire and the cloud simultaneously if you wanted
Right,
to.
no, I understand that. But he was between the Egyptians and the Israelites.
Yes.
And so, but now the Israelites have gone in and followed. Are they following him again?
In through the Red Sea?
Yes.
I don't know.
It doesn't say.
Doesn't say. They could be following Moses because Moses said, he says, go this way, we're going this way. And you're looking down at this Red Sea with walls of water there and a dry patch through the middle, and you're going, you know, I think he's probably right.
So you can't go back because they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
You can stay and die or go forward. But I was just curious that, it doesn't tell us.
No, it doesn't tell us.
What the Lord did at that point.
Right.
Whether he's on the other side, he talks to Moses once he's over there.
Yeah.
That follow-up to
Now the people feared the Lord. Is there somebody back there with a question? Oh. So, now the people feared Jehovah. Why did they fear him?
Well, he just moved the waters out. He just drowned the Egyptians. He saved them. I mean, he just did that to the Egyptians, I think.
I think it's that great military victory
Yeah.
that they would have seen. It's one
It's
thing,
like-
forces of nature refused, some animals died, some kids died, wow.
Well, he
But
didn't-
now this whole army that represents the might and vigor
just
of
wiped
the
out.
greatest nation on earth, he just killed them.
And he held back the
They're dead,
water
they
and
couldn't see
took it
them,
back
they were
down.
dead.
I mean, there are lots of things that the reason they would fear him.
But they didn't fear him through the 10 plagues then.
Right.
Yeah, so.
I think it's a transference of fear. When the Egyptians pursued them, where was their fear?
The Egyptians.
Now that the Egyptians have been whipped by Jehovah, where does the fear transfer
The
to?
one who whipped them.
You see.
What happens with any war, like you were saying. Whoever defeats the other one.
This is why some people struggle with a fear of the Lord, because let's say your fear is of a particular person or circumstance, and God doesn't eliminate that problem and replace it. He just says, I'll be with you through it. We have a hard time then transferring our fear to him, because there hasn't been a part where our fear was that's vacated. He's wanting us to choose to make him more feared than whatever it is we were fearing before. Like we were talking about a minute ago, whether we fear the response of people or we fear the response of the Lord.
I was thinking that in terms of the fire that's being burnt, if you fear the fire, where there's an opening into the fire, and you go through that opening, you're safe, because that's all burned up and it's not going to burn again. But if you stay out where there's fuel to burn, because you're afraid to go through that opening, then you perish. So it's kind of like that. Sometimes we have to go through the fire to be rescued.
Yeah. So from this lesson, we read about people that existed a long time ago, that things happened with them. What does God want us to learn from this? What does he want us to know that would take root in our lives, would influence us in our minds and in our deeds and in our speech, so that we would be people who would be mindful of this. Again, one of the reasons we gather together and we have these times is to remind us, to encourage one another, to have our focus back on the glory of the Lord, so that when we go forward each and every day, not that we leave here today and this afternoon we're just busy and we've left the concept of glorifying Jesus and His presence with us behind, but to be mindful of the presence of Jesus in all that we think and say and do, so that the way that we're going to interact with the people we're going to interact with will be such that it will be honoring to Him. It will be pleasing in His sight. It's as if we could look next to us and say, did I do that okay, Jesus? And we'd be looking for an affirmative response, because we would know that that's what He has wanted for us to do or to say or to think. You know, the way I love my daughter or my wife, or I interact with other people. Whether I'm asking something from them or giving something to them. Whether it's a responsibility I have that I'm handling well, or whether it's a sacrifice I'm making for their benefit. Is my life demonstrating that I am really grateful that He has rescued me out of Egypt, and I value His presence with me? I really want it. And for that reason, I'm going to respond, well, because of what God's done. That's why I'm like this. That's why I think this way. That's why I sound like this, or I do things this way. Because I want to be pleasing to the Lord. Look what He's done. And I should be conscientious about this each and every day. All throughout the day. Now, if we haven't been that, and haven't done it well, or we've done it situationally, like I might do it in this part of my life, but not that part or that part, those are the things that we are to confess and repent of. Not just acknowledge mentally and then move on repeating the same thing. We certainly don't want to go back to Egypt and have lives like the world. That leaven was supposed to be left behind. And in doing this, we're going to bring light. Sometimes in strange places, sometimes at a fire. More commonly, though, it's the places that we normally tread. And know that in those places we're going to receive positive and negative feedback if we're bringing light the way the Lord wants us to. And this is the essence of walking by faith.